Lev Manovich captures the effects of digital cultures and networks in terms of cultural totalization. The global network of individual media, institutions, dispositives, and infrastructures leads to a digital merging of formerly independent phenomena. It is also true, however, that the digital age covertly perpetuates and reiterates long-existing forms and concepts, or overtly plays upon prior forms of artistic manifestation, rearranges the terrain, or downright offers it as a playground of various creative games, blurring the boundaries between artworks and genres, the old and the new, original and remake, remix. This presentation is aimed at comparing two cinematic experiments as possible hypostases of the post-medium condition of cinema, which also reflect on the regional determinedness of art, relating the temporality of post-cinema with the spatial economic confines of the Central and Eastern European movie making. I will examine two contemporary cinematic experiments, a Czech and a Hungarian one respectively, and seek related phenomena in these artworks, resorting to distinct techniques and form-creating principles. Jan Švankmajer's Surviving Life, Theory and Practice, created in 2010, and György Pálfi's Final Cut, Ladies and Gentlemen, created in 2012, can be linked through the ways in which they creatively respond to the limitations imposed by the regional, institutional, art political framework, and find alternative ways of expression that can be addressed from current theoretical perspectives of intermediality and postmediality. Švankmajer's grotesque psychoanalytic comedy starts downright with a reflection upon the limitations, confessing that the animation product is a substitute of a film that could not have been made due to lack of financing. The film substitute is the result of the ingenious combination of mixed techniques, those of live action and animation. This solution not only adapts to the low-budget limitations, but especially initiates a dense dialogue with the cinematic medium as post-medium, as medium supplement, simulacrum. Pálfi's movie, on the other hand, displays another pattern of film supplement. It is a narrative supercut which retells the story of the man and the woman, the most stereotypical of all cinematic themes, by and recontextualizing particular moments from almost 500 films, playfully juxtaposing series of cliched images cut out from film classics. Pálfi's film does not contain such an explicit confession as Švankmajer's one. However, the gesture of making a movie out of other movies, working out of ready-made or found material, by collaging fragments of the classics of cinema, may be interpreted as an implied, ironical reflection on the institution of Hungarian cinema as low-budget cinema. The investigation particularly addresses collage and mashup as figurations of intermediality and postmediality, collage being present in both films, albeit with distinct emphasis, while remix, recycling, repurposing, contrasting the post-medium conditions with the modernist cinephilia in Pálfi's film. These cinematic experiments are also interrelated in terms of remediation, in the sense J. Bolter and David Grusin rethink the term in their volume entitled Remediation, Understanding New Media. Differently from former conceptions of the term, that is, the process by which new media technologies improve upon or remedy prior technologies, Bolter and Grusin suggest by remediation the formal logic by which new media refashion prior media forms, implying the gesture of revitalizing earlier forms of moving images. Švankmajer's film incorporates photography as the so-called prior media form through a combination of photographic collages and live-action photography. Pálfi's movie, on the other hand, remediates and combines a set of earlier pictures of film history, creating the archetypal story of the man and the woman, the profile of whom being contoured by hundreds of actors and actresses' names in the spirit of concrete poetry. Thus, through compiling the story, the cinematic face and body out of the cells, textures, organs, and body parts of cinema history, Pálfi creates, as Balázs Varga puts it, the film of films, a possible cinematic ideal type constructing, beyond the abstract story of love, the story of cinema itself. Pálfi's film documents how old media diffuse into new digital media, how their aura is displaced and reconfigured in accordance with the combinatory logic of the creative, exhaustive game. Another related, albeit distinctly realized phenomenon pertaining to the creation of the two discussed films is the embeddedness of these experiments in particular stylistic generic traditions. Thus, the originality of these experiments has to be valued as performances in relation to these traditions. The animation techniques stop motion or stop frame, pixelation, fast motion, time-lapse images, as well as the mixture of live action and cut-out animation applied in Švankmajer's film, grows out of his idiosyncratic cinematic style and practice as present in his earlier productions, such as The Food or The Conspirators of Pleasure. Marking Švankmajer as the great animation director, profoundly preoccupied with the working of the human mind, as one of his reviewers writes, his early films are Kafkaesque investigations into imagination and the dark recesses of the human psyche, shot through with pitch-black humor, unquote. Pálfi's experiment also goes back to a cinematic tradition, that of the montage film, or with a more recent term that came into being in 2008, of the supercut. The use of found footage has been a general practice of film throughout cinema history, present in the filmmaking practice of Eszfér Shub, co-worker of Eisenstein and Kuleshov, Joseph Cornell, Bruce Conner, Ken Jacobs, Hollis Frampton, to mention but a few of the most outstanding examples. Ever since the avant-garde endeavors of utilizing found material in the spirit of Marcel Duchamp's Objet Trouvé, the span of film history from the early avant-garde to the post-media age has assigned an emphasized role to the found archival footage. Found footage knows a great variety of cultural uses, designated by a great number of terms such as recontextualization, recycling, reuse, repurpose, rewriting, and has become, I quote, if not the dominant critical procedure in independent film and video making. In his volume, Recycled Images, The Art and Politics of Found Footage Films, William Weiss speaks about three modes of found footage use corresponding to three paradigms or political positions. Using archival found footage for the purpose of documentation, characteristic of documentary realism, collage, along the aesthetic principles of modernism, and appropriation in the context of postmodernism. These three modes rely on distinct perceptions of archival found footage, from serving as the evidence of the past in the case of documentation to more subtle medial and representational games relying on the tension between authenticity and mediatedness of the embedded archival found footage that can be encountered in modern and postmodern cinematic productions. Montage film, as a specific case of the use of archival found footage, also has its tradition, its outstanding representatives and specific figurations. Just to mention a few examples from Bruce Conner's movie, a 12-minute experimental collage film associating B-movies, newsreels, short films, through Karl Reiner's Dead Men Don't Wear Plaid, a collage film that is both a parody of and an homage to film noir and the detective movies of the 1940s, combining old and new footage, through Matthias Müller's Home Stories, a collage of Hollywood melodramas of the 50s and 60s, to Michel Hazanavicius and Dominique Mézaret's La Classe Américaine, also known as La Grande Détournement, a French television film, a parody putting together and redubbing extracts of old Warner Brothers films. The aesthetics of the montage film relies on recycling, reutilization, repurposing, often with purposes of entertainment and film parody. The productive potential lies both in the concept and in the practical realization of the series of montage and collage. What György Pálfi and his team carry out in the final cut fits into the tradition of the montage film, but as Miklós Kis points out, also contains an additional degree of creativity which goes beyond its predecessors' originals. This additional element is the intent of creating a continuous narrative by resorting to both the invisible montage, aimed at continuity, reinforced by sound editing, and the visible montage, aimed at maintaining the tension and differences between the shots. The film builds a continuous narrative by juxtaposing series of action types, such as waking up, going into the bathroom, taking a shower, shaving, walking in the street, bumping into the woman, separating from the woman, etc. And this is the opening sequence of Final Cut. In the opening sequence, we can see excerpts, among others, from James Cameron's Avatar, Milos Forman's Hair, Michael Gondry's Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, Károly Mak's Lilionfi, Sam Mendes' American Beauty, Hitchcock's Psycho. Sorry? Okay, Gary Marshall's Pretty Woman, etc. We should also remark the interactive, puzzle-like character of the film, appealing to the viewer's personal cinematic archive. Recognition works in a very interesting way. We recognize films that are familiar to us or preferred by us, not only from emblematic scenes, but based on the most banal and apparently insignificant moments or episodes. Some shots preserve their contextual meaning, others are radically recontextualized. As we could see, there is advancement in the action. In this respect, the form principle of serialism, or with a more recent term, database logic, is completed by the principle of narrativity. Thus, Pálfi's film seems to contradict Lev Manovich, who claims that narrative and database are natural enemies. Manovich argues that, I quote, as a cultural form, a database represents the world as a list of items, and it refuses to order this list. In contrast, a narrative creates a cause and effect trajectory of seemingly unordered items, events. Therefore, database and narrative are natural enemies. Competing for the same territory of human culture, each claims an exclusive right to make meaning out of the world, unquote. The editing technique applied in Final Cut brings evidence for the possibility of coexistence of database structure and narrativity. A further link between the two creative practices examined in parallel is hybridity. Jürgen Müller, in his study Intermediality and Media Historiography in the Digital Era, evidentiates the etymologically hybrid character of the concept of the hybrid itself, the term being a mix of the Latin hybrida, bastard, mixed blood, and the Greek hybris, excess. I quote, the hybrid is founded on the process it designates, unquote, by Müller. Traditionally, the term, I quote Jürgen Müller, denotes and connotes moral, later artistic, and more or less excessive transformations of beings and objects, unquote. The mythological human-animal hybrids, such as Anubis, the god of death, a human shape with the dog's head, are mediators between different dimensions of life. Jürgen Müller also points out the heterogeneity of uses of the concept in various discourses, from cultural sciences to media studies. Švankmajer's film reflects the attraction of surrealism to hybrids. The film employs hybrid creatures such as naked, chicken-headed women. In an interview, Švankmajer said, "For me, creating hybrid creatures is a free game of the imagination. In fact, it is playing at God." In the introduction, the narrator protagonist defines the film as a kind of fusion film, creating passages between dream and reality, not only through the choice of the psychoanalytic theme, and the film is about Eugene, the middle-aged man who leads a double life, a real one and one in his dreams, seeking to find out the identity of the woman of his dreams, Eugenia, who, according to his psychoanalyst, is his anima, and to get the anima pregnant is the worst of all forms of incest. But also through the grotesque sets of animation pictures, giant snakes, chickens, egg and feet turning up from photographed buildings, mixing live action and cut-out animation. Hence, hybridity is present as a medial collage. On an object-centered level, the animated hybrids in Švankmajer's film assume the role of mediation between the dream world and reality, between the unknown passages of the self, displacing the security of identity. As Jürgen Müller formulates, I quote, hybridity plunges the subject into a crisis which makes it aware of its incoherence, its multiplicity, and its own negation, unquote. Besides, on a process-oriented level, hybridity becomes an intermediate practice, displacing the identity of the cinematic medium itself. Ultimately, the psychoanalytic comedy relates film to a theory maybe most fruitfully applied to film besides its primary designation, turning the practice of hybridity into an inherent media reflexivity. For Švankmajer, hybridity provides a release of energy similar to what Marshall McLuhan talks about. I quote, the hybrid of the meeting of two media is a moment of truth and revelation from which new form is born. For the parallel between two media holds us on the frontiers between forms that snap us out of the narcissus narcosis. The moment of meeting of media is a moment of freedom and release from the ordinary trance and numbness imposed by them on our senses, unquote. From Understanding Media, the Extensions of Man. And I quote Švankmajer's thoughts from the same interview. I quote, in my latest film, I quote Lichtenberg as well as Novalis, both of whom say that it is dream and reality that together create human life. This should apply all the more to art. After all, a dream is one of the essential sources of imaginative creative work. Creative work is a certain form of autotherapy for me. Thus, I liberate myself from the demons that moved in with me at some time during my childhood. If art has any sense at all, it lies in liberating man from domestication by civilization, and for it to be able to liberate the audience, then it must first of all liberate its creator, unquote. In Final Cut, hybridity is resulted not only from the great variety of the excerpts embedded in the artificial narrative, from early and classical cinema to animation and contemporary movies. The true hybrid character of Pálfi's film lies in its very double-codedness, the uniformity of the male-female game and of the cinematic representation is revealed side by side with the great diversity of faces, voices, ages, and shapes, as well as generic, stylistic, cultural, linguistic, medial, and technological diversity of cinema. As a conclusion, the aesthetics of the post-medium condition is in both cases related to game, playfulness, and humor. Besides, both Švankmajer and Pálfi spice up the discourse of comedy with metacinematic reflections. Both Švankmajer and Pálfi carry out a subtle criticism of the institution of cinema, which at the same time betrays a profound and irrevocable attraction towards the spirit of film. Švankmajer's psychoanalytic comedy opens up a dream world that carries the remnants of cultural cinema history, while Pálfi's Supercut, as a possible private collection of movies, urges the viewer to rethink the grand récit of cinema history in terms of both nostalgia and criticism. On the one hand, the cinematic moments that turn up in this artificial narrative become nostalgic memory images, archival documents of the institution and history of cinema, losing their temporal and material character in the immaterial frame of the virtual narrative, in the fusion into the imaginary. On the other hand, the narrative brutally cuts cinema back to a skeleton of cliches and stereotypes, to a series of repetitive gestures, trivial episodes. There remain question marks. Can this technique be adapted at full feature-length film without the risk of extenuation? What are the chances of survival of such a creative gesture of the narrative supercut, which turns individual artistic production into the teamwork of users, players, and also hard workers? To what extent can it be further iterated or practiced? Does the grand narrative of cinema still exist? Can it be revived from its ashes? And I would like to end with these question marks and with this fragment from Surviving Life. Thank you for your attention. Should I answer?
What's the impression?
I think so. I try to argue for the duality. So nostalgia and criticism, yes and no. In between, hybridity in this sense. Short answer.
Just a question which is more, it's an egotistical question because I'm very interested in the notion of hybridity. Where would you start? I mean, I'm using the term in my paper, but I know Spielmann has written a book on it, but I haven't read it myself. So what would you recommend, in terms of theoretical writing? The notion of hybridity.
Indeed, German specialist literature is very rich in this sense. And as a starting point, I would recommend Jürgen Müller's study, which appeared in ACTA Film and Media Studies in the journal. I can give you the link. And there he makes references to a great number of further specialist literature.
Because Pálfi's work is somehow innovative, but there is this Christian Marshall's installation, The Clock, which has done, without narrative. That's something similar. How do you consider the relation of two?
It seems that although there is this tradition of montage film and each of the great representatives excel in doing something on their own. This is the merit of Final Cut, that it manages to build to make a narrative, to build a continuous narrative by juxtaposing a great number of film sequences. So I would like to highlight this, that this is its specificity. This is its, yes.
But that's exactly what the clock does. The clock if 24 hours moment to moment isn't a narrative.
Yeah, it's passing the day.
Yeah.
What
the
is?
continuity of time in the clocks, and here is continuity of story. The characters, even if their faces change.
Right,
The story is one.
Very similar.
I don't disagree, but I think a story and a sequence, I think the narratologist might have to answer it.
It's just different principles of coherence.
Right.
Yeah.
And of continuity.
Yeah.
But very much the same method and enabled by exactly the same mechanism.
I think one of the things that I think, and one of the things I'm feeling, like I was at the London Film Festival on the weekend and I saw Michael Robinson's latest film using Dynasty, making a supercut out of Dynasty, and I was surprised that he did it because it was exactly the same as that. I felt, maybe I'm not being specific enough, and you are, but it seems kind of like a glut of this kind of theme. So when artists do it, they do it well. But so many of them are doing it. And then to go back to the idea of predecessors, when you've got sort of people like Martin Arnold and Peter Czerkassky, Morgan Fisher, doing it more interestingly and without a lot of the sort of the pizzazz that Hollywood can offer. And this is not in any sense criticism of you. The film's been made too many times for me. And so I sort of wonder how you kind of, I guess it's that matter of what you find in a particular instance that is sort of driving you, that motivates you. I don't know if you have any sense of this sort of the saturation of this mode.
Yes, so this is the question whether it works all through the film. So this iterative technique, this is a question mark.
Well, I think it works. I think that's why people do it. But I think they keep doing it because it works.
Yeah.
And I don't know that they're adding to it, is my concern.
So it's a question for me too.